So, Lisa, I want to talk about the 9 principles of light airplane flying. And the main one I want to focus on with you is energy management. And of course, that's sort of the broad umbrella topic. But every year, it seems, we find in different magazines, there's going to be, this one is behind the curve, pitcher power. And we go through the debate, right? And
Oh, yeah.
half the debate is theoretical, half the debate is what happens in this piece of the envelope, what happens in that piece. But we're in the airplanes every day, and we have to come up with a practical way of teaching pilots about energy management. So the question I have for you is, you have an interesting approach and a take. So I'd like to learn a little bit more about that. And in particular, you have this idea of making the next 5 seconds perfect. And I imagine that hinges on managing the energy, managing the pitch and power.
Yeah. 90% of it's pitch and power. And sometimes I'll use make next 5 seconds perfect when I'm talking about setting up for the next frequency we're going to be going to. It's like, well, which airport are you closer to? Okay, well, we need to be listening to that one. Or, setting up your VOR, your GPS. So I'll kind of use it in a broad term just to kind of get them thinking a little bit ahead. But you're right, 90% of it is definitely energy management. Students who might see this will go, oh yeah, she screams that to me as soon as we lift off. We're, climbing through 100 feet. She's like, make the next 5 seconds perfect. So in that case, it depends on where you are in the pattern or in the situation. If we've just lifted off, and Billy will see this when we take the Stinson out, we've just lifted off, we're about 100 feet above the runway, I'll say, okay, what can you do to make the next 5 seconds perfect? And generally it boils down to 2 things, okay? In the case of that setting, we've just lifted off, we're climbing out. What do you think the next 2 things are that are going to be really important? And I'm asking you, what do you think they would be?
Asking me, yeah. So am I on speed?
There we go.
Right?
That's one.
Am I on speed? Maybe do I have it trimmed so I don't have to work so hard to maintain that speed?
Believe it or not, I'm not a big fan of trim.
Ever? Or just
no, I trim
it's certain
for
critical...
country.
Yes,
trim for
right.
cross country.
There you go.
Yeah, and I joke all the time, it's like, oh, you should trim for steep turns. I'm like, you know what? If you have to trim for a steep turn, you need a gym membership, not a pilot's license. So I teach people to feel what airplanes are doing. And yeah, if their arm is trembling, it's like, okay, well, maybe we can tremble a little bit.
Right, take a little bit of the pressure off, right?
Kind of a little bit of slack there. But I really teach the feel of flying. Stick and rudder is required reading here.
Sure.
That book was written 75 years ago, and it's a required textbook here.
Absolutely.
It's the art of flying. We don't teach you how to get through check rides. We teach you the art of flying.
Yes.
So back to the original question. If we're climbing out, we just passed 100 feet, you hit the first one, and like I say, generally just 2 things. So airspeed control.
Right.
But what do you think the other one might be
second
during
one,
the climb out?
Second one is, okay, I'm going to make sure if we're producing the power, do I have the rate of climb that I think I should be getting, and is the pitch attitude match all of that?
Think about Caldwell. What do we have that's a kind of a built-in hazard here at Caldwell?
Besides the helicopters?
The helicopters, okay? Yeah. But we'll go with the giant elephant in the room, the helicopters. So if you're taking off on your runway, it's, 100 feet to that taxiway?
Right.
Laterally?
Yeah, not a lot of...
Ideally, we're kind of doing an air show routine.
Course?
There we go. So that's the other one.
Yeah.
So it's going to be, it is energy management. So it's going to be, first of all, did I pitch? Generally, it's around 10 degrees nose up. Did I pitch for a good climb? If it's bumpy, am I fighting the airspeed? No, I'm just holding an attitude. We're holding 10 degrees, right? So did I pitch to my attitude that's going to give me that best rate of climb? And is the ball centered? Is the strut holding still? Is the strut walking back and forth? And you and I have flown together. We don't want to be wandering. That's it. You and I have flown together, and we've talked about that. That strut's walking back and forth. That ball's not centered. Okay? So we're climbing out, and are we holding runway alignment? That's kind of a pet peeve with me. So we have, as much as I don't want to admit I like GPS, I do like GPS. Okay? So as we're climbing out, you just took off from a runway called 300. What do you think your GPS should be saying?
Hopefully something in that
around
range.
300, okay? And you can...
And not to the helicopter side of it.
Yes, exactly. And it's like, if we're taking off on 30, what should we be thinking about? If we're taking off, helicopters to my left, what should I be thinking about?
Don't want to be drifting to the left.
That's it. I don't want to get pulled lift because of torque.
That's right.
Okay? So then this brings us back to, is the strut holding still? Is the ball centered?
Right.
So you see the next 5 seconds broke down to just 2 things. Airspeed, by way of pitch, because power controls altitude, pitch controls airspeed. And is the ball centered? Am I holding a course?
Where am I going? Am I going in the right
exactly.
direction? Yeah.
And I laugh because people will say, oh, just pick something out the windshield. Well, I'm short, and oddly enough, I've always been short. Okay? When I look out a windshield, I see sky.
Blue sky
That's
or
it.
some clouds.
And I see a dashboard. Okay. That's where I started teaching wing strut. It occurred to me when I taught in the T-34, I sat there and stared at the back of a guy's head.
Right.
And I'd go into your old airport at Santa Paula, 35 feet wide.
Right.
And do touch-and-goes in the T-34. And it's like, I had to just look at the back of a strut and
Sure.
look at the size of how much runway is left to my left, right?
You
How
have to
much
get
runway is
other
left.
sources of information.
Yes, exactly.
And it's
so
not always in front of you.
That's it. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. So in front of me is some guy's head.
Right.
So when
I
you,
see
when-
that a lot.
Well, exactly, because you fly tandem stuff. Exactly. Yeah. So a good pilot uses all the windows.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Sure, use the front, but you know what? When we're climbing out, let's use the sides.
Mm-hmm.
Let's use everything. And I got a helicopter over here. Great. Let's keep that guy in sight.
Yeah. So aside from the energy management side, the other principle that you're alluding to is roll yaw and pitch, right? Am I properly managing those things?
That's
And
it.
typically, we want to be canceling yaw, right? And unless we're intentionally slipping the airplane.
Or if we're making a left turn, maybe let the engine help us pull it around.
Sure.
Okay.
But in general, right, especially on that straight out, I have things that I have to cancel out.
That's it.
And even if I'm in the middle of maneuvering, that might add or subtract some other things that are in the mix that are going to require to make some adjustments to the rudder pressure to cancel yaw and keep us coordinated.
That's it.
So how are you going to approach, let's say, bringing your next 5 seconds in the context of managing the traffic pattern, managing speed, power, altitude, roll yaw, pitch? How would you do that in and around the traffic pattern in one hop?
Yeah, that's a super good question. So one of the things that made me come up with next 5 seconds, and I only came up with this about, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago. It's recent. I've been teaching since 1985, and it took me this long to figure it out. 'Cause
We're always learning.
I'm slow on the uptake, I'll tell you that right now.
We're not the same instructors today as we were 5 years
Oh,
ago,
yeah,
20 years
seriously.
ago. Right.
Seriously,
so
true story.
We need to keep
yeah.
learning. Yeah.
I should probably give refunds to those students 20 years ago, but they probably can't find me, so it's okay.
There you
but
go.
So the beauty of next 5 seconds was I would watch the students just get so wrapped around the axle, worried about a radio call. Meanwhile, they're drifting towards a helicopter. I'm like, okay, what's worse? You forgot to call the radio or the midair?
Right.
I'll let you have time to think about
The
that. you know?
Cuisinart that,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So it was just a way to kind of help them triage what's important right now. Okay? That's a problem for a long time from now. You're climbing through 3,100 feet trying to get to 3,400 feet. It's 90 degrees out. We're climbing 300 feet a minute. Believe me, we got some time before we need to worry about pitch, power, trim. And we have a turn coming up. We just heard a guy said he was on 45. Now, as much as I hate to say the radios, take precedence over anything, because they don't. Fly the airplane, not the radio. But it's kind of like, well, you know what? That just jumped in the way of, I'm working so hard on holding perfect airspeed. Okay, well, you know what? Whatever you're doing, if they broke, don't fix it. This pitch seems to be holding that airspeed. So let's think about the next 5 seconds. Oh, there's a guy coming in on a 45. Okay, you're the guy on a crosswind.
New information,
Hey,
right?
new information. So let's take that and think about how the next 5 seconds there is going to apply to us.
Right. And how that picture is changing.
Absolutely.
Right. So it'll be different 5 more seconds, 10 more
That's
seconds.
exactly right. So you just keep picking which chunk do you think is most important.
Sure. Yeah, I just had one this morning, in fact, with the exercises we were doing in the pattern here. So we're banked base to final, and airplane comes out onto the runway. And right away,
Welcome to Caldwell.
the trainee says, oh, we're going to have to go around. We're not going to make it. And my first instinct is, okay, we've identified new information.
That's it.
But this is where things are now. Where are they 5 seconds from
That's
now?
right.
Where are they 30 seconds from now?
Yes.
It's a moving picture. Unless they decide to sit there and wait for a while, right?
Right.
But they're moving. And so I say, all right, well, we know they're there. We have called up our go around mentally in case we need to do that. But let's fly our airplane, our
Yes,
numbers,
yes.
our profile.
That's right, let's
and we'll
fly
make
our
decisions
airplane.
as we
Exactly.
go. Yeah. And it turned out that it worked out just fine.
Yeah.
They were gone and we were able to land.
Yeah.
So Lisa, give me the imaginary traffic pattern where you're going to do the 5 seconds. Piece by piece, or at least segment by segment,
Yeah,
right? An
yeah.
example, maybe. Absolutely.
Okay, so we already discussed takeoff, 100 AGL. Okay, let's check stuff. And you had talked about are we producing power? We actually have a brief before every single takeoff, before we even taxi the whole short. We call it the 3 emergencies brief. Not on a checklist, can't be on a checklist. It has to be memory. Number 1, if we don't have 3 greens. In other words, 2200 RPM, green oil, green pressure temp, all that good stuff, right? 3 greens. That's an aborted takeoff. Number 2, I just lift it off. I don't see 3 greens. Nose down, flaps down, put it back down. Number 3, I don't see the 3 greens. Okay, are we still producing power? And so we have that routine. So during climb out, we've already addressed that. We addressed that pretty early on. Okay. Now we're climbing out. We talked about how next 5 seconds generally is just two things, sometimes 3, and you identified them. Okay, it's going to be hold a runway heading, maintain a good airspeed, coordinated, all that good stuff. Next step would be, and this is where 5 seconds works out nicely. It's like, well, what are the next 5 seconds? Because sometimes students will be on an upwind and they're so wrapped around the axle going, I've got to hold 80 perfectly, that it's like, yeah, we also are in the pattern. We're not flying across country to Oregon. So it's like, okay, well, what comes next? Well, 3,100 feet. I'm within 300 feet of pattern altitude. It's time to start my turn. Then we break it down so tiny as to how, and this is your thing, how do airplanes turn? Okay? So we break it down so tiny as to, okay, well, how do you turn an airplane? And I joke with them all the time. I go, this is how you got to your flying lesson. This is how you fly the airplane. Okay? It's not a car. And it depends on the airplane. When I take someone out for a discovery flight, or if I teach a student in his own airplane, first thing I do is we go out, like you and I have done, we go out and play with Dutch rolls. I figure out, is it an aileron first airplane? Is it a rudder first airplane? We were climbing out, everything was going great. So we would think next 5 seconds, well, I'm looking for an altitude. I've already got airspeed figured out. I'm doing that with a pitch. RPM is holding really well at, whatever we're happy with. So then we think, I'm going to make a turn. And it seems so absurdly simple to go, well, yeah, just turn the airplane. No, there's more to it than that, as you well know.
Right.
You and I have made careers out of teaching people how to simply turn an airplane 90 degrees, right? There's a right way and a wrong way. So when we take someone out for their discovery flight, and early on before we ever put them in the pattern, when they're just getting there kind of figuring out the plane, we have figured out that the old 172s are rudder first airplanes. Okay? So if I'm climbing out and I'm going to make a right-hand turn, I'm already holding some right rudder, well, I'm just going to put some more right rudder in, and I actually teach people, don't do anything to the ailerons yet. Let's just see what that does. And people think, oh, the ball's going to shoot off to the left. No, it actually doesn't. Okay? Because that little bit of right rudder, what's it going to do to your outside wing?
Yeah, it's going to make it move a little faster.
There we go. And
it's going to roll a little bit.
Bingo! There's my ailerons. Okay, so I'm just going to put some right rudder in. Now, if I feel that putting that right rudder in actually kind of scooted the butt out, and I'm, my calibrated butt's going, hey, that was too much, then it's like, okay, then bring some aileron in to balance it, because everything in flying is a balance. Okay, so we bring that right rudder in. It starts its turn nicely, and we maybe follow it with some aileron. I get within 10 degrees, 15 degrees of my desired heading, which, because of 5 seconds, I already know that's a course of 030, okay, because we thought about it ahead of time. And I get pretty close to that. Okay, well, let's just ease some of that right rudder off. And then, if I'm still climbing, which in the summer I will be, then I'm probably going to have to put some of that right rudder back in. So I'm using the torque to help me make these turns and stop these turns. I'm making the airplane help me rather than fighting the airplane. So I'm working with the airplane, and I'm using its natural tendencies to my advantage. But next 5 seconds meant that I knew I was going to start with rudder. I knew, if I had $1 for every student that's dropped their nose on crosswind and picked up 10 miles an hour, it's like, no. You watch that attitude indicator. If you can't see it out the window, at least look at the attitude indicator. Hold that climb attitude. So it's like, we know that's probably going to be a mistake, and we might overshoot a turn. Well, then there's your next 5 seconds. We gave ourselves some assignments.
Right.
And it's just little micro assignments. I'm not looking at the whole pattern by any means. And you'll notice at no point during this have I said talk on the radio. Because let's fly the airplane. And if the radio's a thing, that's okay. We have his and hers push to talk buttons. I'll do the talking until you get this really figured out and feeling right, okay? So that was crosswind.
Priorities, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. It's triaging all over again, huh? So what would happen over the next 5 seconds? Well, I expect altitude to happen fairly soon here. And if it doesn't happen in about the same place every time, then I can tell myself, oh, then I've got some sort of convective air thing going on. Maybe I have an updraft or a downdraft, a little bit of wind shear. I got something weird going on outside. So I'll file that away for next time I come around that corner. Okay? For every updraft, there's a downdraft. Okay? If I've been hitting a downdraft, it's like, well, I wonder if I'm going to hit the updraft later. I'm just always asking questions and seeing if my guesses are working out or not.
Sure.
But I'm always waiting for these things to happen. Rather than reacting, we're always proacting.
Right. So at the same point in the pattern, if we're surprised every single time at that same point, by the 5th time, we might have learned something. It's like,
You'd hope.
oh, there's something happening here that's
Sure,
unique.
exactly.
It's always bumpy in this corner
That's
or
it.
whatever that
That's
might be.
it.
So
Yeah.
we're prepared for it
Yeah,
ahead of time.
exactly. And that's something I learned in Alaska was, one of the pilots I trained with always said for every updraft there's a downdraft, and it's kind of like, well, yeah, duh. But in a way, it's like, oh no, that's actually pretty sage advice. You do kind of wait for that kind of stuff, and sometimes those weird thermals are in the same place every time.
Sure.
And look for outside things too. If you see the hawks over there just holding still, well, that's an updraft. Okay, so A, don't hit the hawks, and B, be ready for an updraft.
Be ready for something to happen.
Yeah.
Right. So talk to me about the 5 seconds base to final turn. You're sort
yes.
of in that dynamic
That's it.
part of it right there.
That's it. Yeah, and that base to final turn, that's where the porpoise landing started. That's where overshooting the numbers started. That's where all the bad stuff started, was that base to final turn. It's all about energy control. Okay? So here at our school, we teach dead stick landing every single time. We don't carry power down final. The only time we'll let them carry power down final is when they're demonstrating a short field landing. And that's simply so they have that ability to move that spot back and forth.
Sure.
But once they're ready for their check ride, we want them to be able to dead stick a spot landing also, because it shouldn't just be commercial pilots know how to do that. Okay, engine failures don't wait for you to have your commercial. If you're going to be good at picking that spot in a cornfield and putting it there, well, you might need to know that the day after you got your check ride.
Right.
So
Energy management and judgment.
that's it.
Okay.
That's it. Yeah. And so the base to final turn, it kind of started downwind to base. So if their speed wasn't dialed in, downwind to base, and their configuration and where they were in the pattern, and obviously since we teach dead stick landings here, we fly a tighter pattern than a lot of people do. If it wasn't lined up out there, it can be fixed on final, but obviously you've given yourself a few more things to get a little more aggressive
busier.
about, right? Yeah, you're a little busier, exactly. So I would say base to final, your next 5 seconds are going to be, have I put the recipe together? I always call it the recipe. I say, if you don't get all the ingredients in this recipe, it's going to suck. You get the right amounts of them, probably going to be pretty consistent. And then you can just deal with the little changes that happen. So base to final, I'd say, are we turning 500 feet AGL? And while we're on base, I'll have them put their finger on the airspeed, on the altimeter, and say, where is 500 AGL? Don't do math. Just divide the altimeter in half. Where's the ground? Okay, then there's 500. So don't do math. Just point to it for me and say, well, that's one of your goals. That's one of your assignments right now, is to turn final 500 AGL. To turn final with the flaps that you've decided on. To have the airspeed absolutely dialed in. And power, most likely 15, 14, 1300 RPM. If the wind is allowing for that today. Right. If the heat is allowing for it. If the load of the airplane is allowing for it, right? But they kind of have those guidelines ahead of time, turning base to final. Then, as they're coming around base to final, have we dropped the nose? They get excited. They see the numbers. Yay, there's the numbers.
Start pushing, right?
Yeah. And so they see the numbers, they drop it. So it's like one of the 5 seconds things might be, keep the numbers in the same place on the windshield. Okay? And if you're one of those people that likes to hold 3 fingers out, fine, hold 3 fingers out. I don't care. If I held 3 fingers out, I'd hit a dashboard. So
whatever
that
it
does
is, make
nothing
it
for me.
Make it constant.
But be consistent, exactly. Yeah. And have yourself the assignment for, okay, my next 5 seconds are now going to be flying final. Is my airspeed on? Is my altitude on? And then they have to decide which one of those is more important. And I will always contend airspeed is more important than altitude. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree, because if airspeed's all over the place, you can't really judge your altitude.
That's it. Yeah.
Am I hiding altitude in excess speed? Am I losing altitude at a much higher rate because I'm low on speed? So yeah, I always get the speed set, because then that helps your judgment.
That's it. Yeah. And then that's where we get to play with controlling energy, and this is what makes it fun. I've been teaching recently with an instructor from another school doing tailwheel training on this guy. And so I told him right off the bat, I said, okay, I know you guys carry power, and I know you fly a little bit bigger pattern than we do. I said, here's what we're going to do, though. And I'm not sure he was real, like, why would you guys do it that way? I think it doesn't matter what he thinks. But anyhow, I think he kind of wonders, like, why would you guys do it that way? And so I told him, I said, you can be 14 to solo a glider. But you got to be 16 to solo an airplane. What's the difference between a glider and an airplane? It's not that you have to know about magnetos and alternators. It's energy management.
Right.
And if you can be younger and solo a glider, why don't we? That must be in there a little bit easier in some respect. Okay, there must be, this part of it must be a little easier. So why don't we make it a little bit easier on ourselves and pretend this is a glider? The other thing is, if we don't learn how to come in dead stick every time, we're going to have to resort to go-arounds way too often. And
That, or if it is a real case, then
well,
we
that's
haven't
right. And we don't
experienced it for a
yeah,
long time.
That's
right?
it. That's it. Yeah. And I'm a big fan of, you got to dance with the one that brung you when it comes to finals. Okay. If you're coming down final and it's a hot mess, you need to fix it. And I have to remind myself to teach go-arounds. I really do, because students will come in there just all messed up. And a lot of instructors say, oh, just do a go-around. It's the most valuable tool you've got. And it's like, well, it's a valuable tool. I will not say it's not. It's an excellent idea to save a lot of maintenance problems for people. I'm sure if go-arounds were done more often. But in real life, like in the backcountry where you don't get to go-around, or you've had an engine failure, no, you need to fix that mess you made.
Right.
You stepped in it, now fix it.
So if you're starting with a mess,
That's
what
it.
do I need to fix in the next 5
That's
seconds?
it.
Right. So if I'm thinking kind of longer term,
Mm-hmm.
if it's available to me, I can make the go around at any of these points. Right. So
Oh, absolutely.
is the speed relatively close enough that
Mm-hmm.
in the next 5 seconds I can fix that? And then that opens up other doors for me, right?
That's
in
it.
terms of judgment and
Yeah.
getting to my spot, or maybe I have to shift the spot, but there's still plenty of runway,
Mm-hmm.
and so on. So yeah, I think kind of thinking in, okay, what's most important right now, right? Well, deciding to go
Exactly.
around may or may not be, if I have the time and everything else, and I can start chipping away at the deviations. Keeping in mind that I can decide to go around at any point.
Oh,
there.
absolutely.
But if it's always just, oh my gosh, just throw my hands up and
Right,
leave.
right.
Well, what happens when we can't do that?
That's it. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. Yeah. And like I said, I'm not trying to say, go-arounds are for babies or something like that. I'm not saying that at all. Go-arounds are extremely valuable tools to have available to you. But you just don't. I've had enough engine failures that have made me put an airplane back on the ground. Like, man, it is dead. Or in the ocean. I mean, it just doesn't always work. So you've got to be ready for just fixing what you got. So 5 seconds coming down final. I like how you brought up the thing about let's fix airspeed. And we started talking about what's more important, altitude or airspeed, and you and I both contend airspeed. Without airspeed, it's a parked airplane.
Right.
Okay? So that's where the trading energy is so much fun, when you learn how to fly correctly. As opposed to you just come down final, it's like, my instructor told me to do this, this, and this, and I'm doing this, this, and this. It's like, yeah, but what if one of those variables changes? Now you're doing a go-around. Okay, well, no, you're not. Let's see if we've got something we can work with here. So sometimes I'll put the students in a situation where I'll say, well, hang on to this altitude for a little while. And if anybody watches this video, they'll say, oh, that's what she's been doing to me. Sometimes I'll say, once you add a little bit of power, let's hang on to this altitude for a while. And then I'll get them on final maybe 650, 700 feet up. And I'll say, oh, you better slow down a little bit. And so they slow down. And you go, okay, now what are you going to do? Well, this is an energy trade now. So we're going to take it out of the altitude battery, put it in the airspeed battery. And I was really happy to see the FAA is finally addressing that in the Airplane Flying Handbook. They're finally talking about these little stores of energy and trading one for the other a little more.
Slowly but surely.
Yeah, exactly. They're really starting to address that, because, man, that is what it's all about.
Sure.
And then the glider pilot analogy, I love to use that on students, because they'll say, well, I'm just going to, they'll be saying, let's say we're coming down final at 70 instead of 60, just to make up some numbers. And they're low. They're starting to actually see a red light show up on the VASI. And at our school, it's 4 whites. We never carry 2 reds and 2 whites because it takes power to get there. That's a 3-degree glide slope. They don't glide at 3 degrees.
You're below the airplane's glide slope.
That's it. That's
Right.
exactly. That's a great
Which
way
is
of putting it.
double a typical 3-degree or more. yeah.
Exactly. So, let's say we have one light starting to go red. I go, okay, what are you going to do? And this is where energy trading is so much fun. It's so cool when they get it, when the light bulb finally comes on. Because instead of adding power, they go, oh, power controls altitude, pitch controls airspeed. Instead of thinking, well, I got to add power, it's like, but before we make that decision, let's look at airspeed. Let's see if we got something there.
Am
we
I
can
hiding
trade.
something in there?
Yeah, I like that term. Are we hiding something? That's a really good way of putting it. Yeah. And so it's like, yeah, but we want to come down at final at 60, and you've got about 65. Just bring the nose up a zillionth of a skosh.
Yeah, they're very subtle adjustments.
It is. I'm not going to give you a degrees. I'm not going to say put the numbers in a new place. I want you to feel your way through this. And I want you to look out the window, see something change, and realize it's going to change again after you change it, because airspeed will change and now your pitch is going to change. So I want you to put a change in there. I want you to feel what that did for you, and then give it a second. That's one of the things I also tell students all the time. We don't have to do anything fast. We just have to do it right.
Be patient. There's
That's
a certain amount of
it.
patience, right? 5 seconds means different things to different people. To a brand new student, 5 seconds might as well be a microsecond.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting
Right?
it. Yeah.
So if you have a lot of experience doing that particular thing, 5 seconds is a lot of time.
Yeah.
You can probably adjust 3 things and tell me what color the car was on the freeway.
Yes.
Right. So it's all relative, right? In terms of what you can do with those 5 seconds.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's a great way. That's a great way to put it.
So great conversation, Lisa. And I'd like to wrap it up with your final thoughts and kind of key takeaways, or summarize your 5 seconds, next 5 seconds.
Well, I think I would say it's a good way to organize your thinking. It's great for the brand new primary student who it's a fire hose of information coming at them. They don't know what's important. They don't know what they can just kind of gloss over. They're hoping the wings don't fall off this thing while we fly today. I mean, it's just like all these thoughts going through their head, which is completely reasonable. So it's just a nice way for them to take this into smaller pieces, like the old joke about how do you eat an elephant, one bite at a time. Yeah. So we want to just take the whole process, and today we've been talking about the pattern for touch and goes. We want to just take the whole process and go, you know what? I don't care about base leg. I don't care about the guy who's 8 miles north. Just don't care. I care about right now, 5 seconds. So we can just take this 5 seconds and go, okay, what's important during this time frame? And then it's almost like you could say, okay, there's a 6th second, which is what's the next 5 seconds, right? So can we stitch these together? And if you find yourself flying along doing nothing for a moment, you're forgetting something. Okay, then let's think what the next 5 seconds might be. So it's a good way to kind of kickstart their preemptive thinking for, okay, I'm not doing anything right now. Okay, well, then you're making a mistake. You should be doing something right now. Have you checked the fuels on both tanks? I mean, do something. But think of, okay, well, what could the next 5 seconds be? And by doing that, they tend to get ahead of the plane. I mean, it's pretty slick. And we joke about, I can just see the look on their face, their shoulders relax, the whole 9 yards. I'll say, the game just slowed down, didn't it? And they always say, it did. I go, that's because you're ahead of it now.
Yeah. And I love the word stitch. You're really stitching the pattern together, and it's one piece at a time. That's perfect.
It is. Yeah, it really is. Because if you try to look at the whole thing as one giant process, it's overwhelming. And I still remember when I was a student pilot at Camarillo a really long time ago. I honestly don't remember how many years it was now. But I just remember being so overwhelmed and just thinking, I'm never going to get this figured out. There's just so many things. So if we can just break it down into little bite-sized pieces and just take one piece and let it lead to the next piece, it will slow the game down for us, and it'll keep us from thinking about stuff you just don't need to be thinking about right now. But you can put that in the next package, maybe,